There's a point that arrives quietly after awareness has settled after trust, has replaced effort after identity, has loosened its grip where something unexpected happens. The need for resolution fades, not because everything is resolved, not because life suddenly makes sense, but because the pressure to finish experience is no longer running the show. For a long time, we move through life as if each phase needs to conclude properly, as if confusion must turn into clarity, as if discomfort must lead to insight, as if every chapter needs a closing paragraph that explains what it was all for. And when awareness first begins, that habit doesn't disappear. It often intensifies. We want to understand what's happening to us. We want language for it. We want to know where it's going. Resolution feels like safety. It feels like something solid we can stand on. But as the shift deepens, as life becomes less narrated and less managed, the urgency to resolve experience begins to soften. You start to notice something subtle. Nothing is actually asking to be finished. Moments arrive, they pass, and life continues, without commentary, without summary. I remember realizing this not as a thought, but as a change in how tension felt in my body. I wasn't bracing anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next realization to make sense of what came before. I wasn't scanning my life for signs that I had arrived. There was no arrival. There was just living, and that felt sufficient. This can feel unsettling at first, because resolution has been how we measure progress. We're taught that if something is unresolved, it's unfinished in a bad way. Problem, a loose end, a failure to understand. But unresolved experience isn't broken. It's alive. Resolution closes things. Life doesn't always want to close. Sometimes it wants to remain open, ambiguous, in motion. Living without needing resolution doesn't mean you stop learning from experience. It means you stop demanding that experience justify itself. You stop asking, what did this give me? What did I gain? What does this say about my growth? You let the experience stand on its own. And paradoxically, that's when understanding arrives more naturally. Not as conclusions, but as quiet recognition. You see things differently over time without trying to. You notice how certain phases changed you without ever explaining themselves. This is where Season 1 lands. Not in clarity, not in answers, but in a different relationship with uncertainty. You're no longer trying to rush through it. You're not trying to turn your life into a coherent story that makes sense to others, or even to yourself. You're allowing it to be what it is while it's happening. This doesn't make life easier, but it makes it more honest. You still feel doubt. You still feel loss. You still feel moments of confusion. But those experiences don't threaten you anymore. They don't demand resolution before you're allowed to move forward. They don't stall your life until they're understood. You move with them, alongside them. You let questions exist without forcing answers. And that's a big shift. Because much of our suffering comes from trying to end things prematurely, trying to conclude grief, trying to finish uncertainty, trying to resolve parts of ourselves that are still unfolding. When you stop needing resolution, you stop fighting the unfinished nature of life. You recognize something fundamental. Life doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in overlapping phases. Things begin before others end. Understanding trails behind experience. Meaning arrives late or not at all. And that's not a flaw. That's how living works. This stage often feels quieter than the beginning. There's less searching, less urgency to define where you are. You're no longer asking, am I still waking up? Am I doing this right? Have I integrated enough? Those questions dissolve not because they were answered, but because they no longer matter. You trust yourself to meet what comes next without needing to prepare intellectually for it. You trust that if something needs attention, it will show itself. And if something remains unresolved, it doesn't mean you failed. It means life is still speaking. Living without resolution also changes how you look back on the season you've just lived. You don't summarize it. You don't reduce it to lessons. You don't turn it into a before and after story. You let it remain complex, messy, incomplete. And that respect for complexity is a form of maturity. This is where awareness stops being a project. It becomes background, supportive, unremarkable. You're not trying to stay aware. You are, because nothing is pulling you out of life anymore. You're not watching yourself live. You're living, and living doesn't ask for resolution. It asks for presence. This episode doesn't conclude season 1. It settles it, like setting something down without putting a lid on it. Season 1 was about the shift, the moment things stopped working the way they used to and began reorganizing quietly. You didn't fix anything. You didn't solve yourself. You learned how to stay, and staying doesn't require closure. It requires honesty. So if you're finishing this season and wondering what it all amounted to, that question itself is part of the old habit. You don't need to extract value from what you lived. You lived it. That's enough. Season 2 doesn't come next because you completed season 1. It comes because life keeps moving in its own time. New questions arise. New phases begin. Not because you planned them, because that's how being human works. For now, there's nothing to resolve, nothing to wrap up, nothing to explain, just a recognition that something shifted, and that shift is now part of how you live, unfinished and real. If the season stayed with you, you're not alone in that. Liking the video helps these reflections reach others who may be moving through a similar turning point. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, sharing it might help more than you think. You're welcome to subscribe if you'd like to continue into the next season, not to find answers, but to keep living honestly, unfinished.